Welcome back, everybody. Obviously, we'll be picking up right where we left off. Dan, if you want to let them see the photograph of the painting where it was left off last week. So you can see, my lights, one of the nice things about this, the lights, they're built up. They're not very bright. Actually, I like the idea of making a point of this. They're not very light from a value standpoint, but they are very, very colorful. They're highly chromatic, so they look really bright. But if you compare it to white, you can see just how dark it actually is. But they read as very bright. Against white, they fall back nicely. So, and again, this is just how you manage your colors and your values, right? So you can trade off by having a higher chroma and a lower value. So something that's darker, that's very colorful, is going to read as being more brilliant. And that's what I'm taking advantage of that here. Also, the richer color makes the painting a lot more visually interesting. So I got the mountains started last week, just a quick lay-in. I'm going to leave them for now. I'm actually going to start working into the figure today. I've been bouncing around back and forth up until about like 20 minutes ago as to what I was going to work on today. And so I'm going to try to get a large portion of the figure laid in today. I'm going to stay away from the head and the hands. I'm just going to be working. I've set up my palette, and I've got my darkest shadow on the armor, which I have pushed all the way to pitch black. It is a pure black, not pure black paint, but it is actually a very, very dark black. And then I've worked my way up to what would be my lightest value in the armor. And if you look at it, you can see the scale here. My darkest shadow all the way to my lightest light. And then so you can see the scale, and then I put the lightest light back over here so you can see just how much of a jump is visible between the darkest shadow and that light in our photograph. And so the darkest shadow is like in here, it's in here, and the lightest of those lights is like in the leg bands up in here. But it gives you an idea of what that range actually looks like. Because in the photograph, you're not seeing very many places where you get this jump. Like this jump between my darkest shadow and my light happens right here. It's about the only place where it happens. Every place else you're dealing with different values of dark bumping up against different values of light. But this allows you to see the scale I'm going to be working with. So this will be the lightest of my values inside of the armor. And then these two are actually, if I have time, I'll go in and I'm going to play around with the mountain range a little bit and kind of build that up. So again, trying to knock out a little bit of this and a little bit of that as we go, with the hope of possibly having just 3 more sessions on this. If not, then it'll be 4. Definitely no more than that. But I'll see if I can push through this and get it done in 3 more sessions tonight and then 2 others. So I'm going to pick a place to start, and I think I'm going to start back in here, and then I'm going to come across the gun and then work my way down, kind of on an angle like this. That way, I can rest my hand as I work. If I start working out here, when I try to go in here, I won't have a place to put my hand. I'd rather not use the maul stick if I can rest my hand on the board. There'll be places where the maul stick is better, but I think for a lot of this stuff, being able to rest my hand for these very precise marks, find the maul stick, it's not as secure as resting on the board itself. And since everything is dry, as long as I'm working in this direction, I should be fine. So I always work from darkest to lightest. So I'm going to find in here nice dark shadow. I'm going to fill a big shape, and then I'm going to start building out my lights from there. So I'm just picking. I think I'm going to get right in here. I think I'm going to start in there. I think, and maybe after I do this, I may reach over and get this. This arm will probably go undone today. Depends on how things move. Like out in here, I've got these bright lights. I'll see how it goes. I'm not really sure. And it's like as I start working, I'll make that decision. I'll get a sense of how fast the gun's moving along and what I'll be able to achieve. Obviously, the lower body doesn't have nearly as much information in it, so I don't have to get half the figure done. I get about probably around 35–40% of the figure done if I start up here, and then I'll be able to knock out the remainder of it next week because the bottom is a lot simpler. These very large pieces of real estate where there's not much going on back in here, this is one value. Even in the belt, there are just maybe 3 values, and they're very simple geometric shapes. The only details down in here are kind of in this piece of armor. Shape this up a little bit close to where I work. I may even be tearing the photograph up a little bit as I go today, just to allow me to get closer to things as I go. Tape the bottom also. Again, if I'm going to be resting my hand on this thing as I go, I don't want this sliding under my hand as I work. I also make sure it's squared to the edge. If it's on an angle, as I start working, these shapes won't look like these shapes. So I want to make sure it's relatively squared. Right back in here. And again, looking for a good starting point. Try to get a nice big shape to start. I'll build off of that shape once it's in. Some of these things, there are little things going on in here, but I can leave them out for now, and I can just kind of lay in some marks later on, going down to a smaller brush to start. There's just some tight details in here, and so they're part of the structure of this gun. So kind of getting stuck putting them in now. I don't want to. The transfer is here, so I don't want to throw the transfer away, right? These are all mechanical details, so I don't want to lose them. I don't want to do some sloppy strokes unintentionally because I'm using a brush that's too big, and then lose my drawing entirely, and then have to figure out where everything goes later. And it's not that I can't do it, but it potentially eats up time I don't want to sacrifice. I'm just going to move back and forth between these brushes, and once I get the small spaces filled, I go right back to a big brush. That's always the case. I never work with a brush, with a small brush, if a big brush will do the job. Big brushes, first of all, they fill faster. They do the work quicker, and they're more expressive. The smaller brushes tend to be very tight, kind of stuffy marks. And I find that the bigger brushes, they don't allow you to get into too much of the particulars, and so you're forced to think more generally. And most of these marks, that's all you need. You don't need the specifics. Again, I've actually got both of my reference photos. I pulled it off the easel back here because I've got like all kinds of marks of tape and things. I can't see some of the information on the arm here and up here. So I want to make sure that I have access to the information as I work. Make sense of what I'm dealing with here. And this is going to be, what we refer to as direct painting. For the most part, you'll see me blocking in a value at a time, working my way through the value scale, from darkest to lightest, area by area. And when I do this, I try to make sure that it's not tedious when I'm doing it. I try to make sure that there's some movement in the brush, that I'm not laboring with my nose pressed against the panel as I go. All right, this is a little bit taxing on the body, I find. It's not relaxing to work this way, but it's effective. with these live streams, I'm trying to show a broad range of approaches, not just one thing, not even the most advanced ways of going about this, or the ones that require the most understanding. Trying to make what we're doing here, setting it up so that it makes enough sense that everybody watching can kind of play around with this stuff on their own at home, glean a little bit of information and get better results in your own work. And so trying to showcase a bunch of different ways of tackling these problems, I think, is more beneficial than just pushing through the painting the way I would normally do it. Like, I wouldn't paint this way because it's too much labor. But this is a very safe way of approaching a painting like this. And you haven't seen me paint anything this way yet. So it makes sense to me to tackle it like this. I'm not thinking in layers now. I'm thinking everything done in one pass. So if I were thinking in layers, I might leave this out and put it in later on. It's crisp, clean detail. It'd be very easy to drop in later on. The moment I'm dealing in a lot of details, a lot of landmarks, so you'll see me, I'll get quiet from time to time as I try to make sense of what's going on. I don't want to place any paint where it doesn't belong, right? In the beginning of the process, when I'm laying in the shadows, they're going to establish what I intended when I did my drawing. And so it requires a little bit more focus. Once the shadows are in, or the darker values are in, it becomes much easier. I can make sense of what my intent was in the lines that I put down.
Got a question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
From Dina about direct painting.
Yes.
With doing direct painting on the underpainting, are you doing full value on everything, or will you do 3/4 value on the direct painting parts that you would then plan to glaze?
No, everything is being pushed pretty far down the road towards the end goal. So I'm not half measuring these. This is pitch black. There's nothing darker. There's no way to make this darker. It is as dark as you'll get with paint. And this matches the lightest value here. The densities of the paint are enough that everything should cover and be completely opaque. So there'll be very little manipulation of this figure when it's done. It should look pretty much like this right off the opaque painting. And again, that doesn't mean that I won't tweak it a little bit or take some liberties with it along the way, but for the most part, what I'm working with right now is going to be the end of the painting process for this piece. I'm not going to be building in additional layers. At least that's not my thinking. I may find myself there. I may find myself along the way deciding, well, I think a little bit of something glazed on top would be good, but I want to try to avoid glazing on the armor. That makes sense of all of this. So direct painting doesn't leave room. You don't go into it with the intent of glazing on top of it. The intent is to do it like alla prima in one sitting. Wet paint from the first brush stroke should be wet when the last brush stroke is put down. Right? And like I said, I'm not going to finish the figure tonight, but the portion that I work on will be completed, probably fully completed at the end of the night. Just everything that I put down should be the way it'll look in the final painting. And again, there's always a chance that I'll make an adjustment to that. But at the moment, that's the plan. I have areas where the drawing is not visible. I've got to figure out where things go. A lot of texture in the board from when I went out first day. And so I see lots of like specular highlights in here. nice if the board was smoother. And again, that was my mistake. I did that when I so, and I have to decide now, like, how big a space do I want to bite off before I start moving down the value scale? And I'm thinking I'm probably going to take this entire area in here, and I'm probably going to come, I'll fill all of this, and I may take the gun all the way to here, to her hand. So I'll do all of this. And I'll see how that feels. And so the idea is, if I put down 3 strokes of the darkest shade and then start working my way through, I'm constantly shifting gears. If I get a large area of my extreme shadow filled, my darkest shadow, and then a large area, and then I move to this, then I'm here for a while, then I move to this and I'm here for a while. If I'm constantly bouncing back and forth, it slows you down. And it's like assembly line. The more of this value that I can get in place and then start working around it, the faster this painting is going to progress. So I want to make sure that I'm biting off a reasonable chunk as I work. I'm also keeping in mind the reference. I don't want it too far away from what I'm working on. And so I'm being thoughtful about that as well.
So to your point then, what would be the other extreme of that, Kevin, where, like, what happens when you extend yourself too far in order to create that nice assembly line? What would be the situation there?
Well, I mean, the only drawback to doing that is that you could potentially bite off more than you had planned and then be stuck working a longer day than you intended, right? So if I let's say I filled everything in the upper body that was this shade, figuring I would then be able to knock out the rest of it around it, I might wind up with areas that I don't get to because I run out of time, right? We have a 3-hour window. And so, like, if I were doing this and I had no deadline, just me sitting down painting, I might go in and paint the whole upper body with this value and then move to this one and then work my way through. Simply because you get faster and faster as you work with the single shade. You become more attuned to where it fits, and you just kind of connect yourself to the reference better as time goes by. Every time you break from it and switch to a new value, you have to find the value and locate it everywhere in the image to be able to move the piece forward. It takes a little time. You do that each time you move from value to value. Now, the spaces get smaller and smaller as the painting gets filled, so these at this end are going to go much faster than that at this end. But I find that getting those initial shadows in, as much of it as possible, really explains what's going on. It makes a lot more sense of it before you start jumping into the next value up as you work up towards your lights. Again, I want to make sure, everything's running longer than initially intended, and I want to make sure, as we've been working, and so I want to make sure that I don't bite off more than I can chew for the time allotted. Again, if I were doing this in the real world, the amount of time that I commit to this would be whatever it needs to be. It wouldn't be like, oh, I'm only going to paint 3 hours or 5 hours. I would sit down with the intent of finishing a certain amount of this painting, and I wouldn't get out of the chair until that amount of the painting was complete. And that's just how I would go about it. So I wouldn't be looking at the clock. But that's really the only drawback, is that you have to watch out not to take off more than you can actually get done in the time you're planning on working.
Question for you, Kevin. Are we still hitting likes for a pajama party? Just curious.
I guess, I don't know.
Okay. So the offer still stands, 150 likes before a live session ends. It's quite the challenge, but one day I think we could make that in time.
Yeah, I don't see why not. That's a lot of people showing up.
Yeah.
Again, I'm being very particular here, really taking my time, making sure I know exactly where all of these marks go. If I put something down and it doesn't belong, I might start building off of it, and start building mistakes into the painting. And again, like the gun is like the armor that I put in the background. It has to be precise. It can't be sloppy. It can't be loose. It's mechanically made, and so it has to be right when it goes down. Once I start throwing away my drawing, my transfer, I'm not going to get it back. And so the transfer is there for a reason. It's there to streamline the process for me. And so I want to make sure that I keep it as long as I can, that I paint into it and utilize it. There's no point in having a transfer if you don't utilize it. And if you put down sloppy marks and you lose the drawing, or even worse, you think you've got the drawing, the paint over the drawing, but the marks have migrated. Now you start building out the painting beyond that first value in places it doesn't belong. And so I want to make sure I'm being as precise as possible with this first value. It'll set the stage for everything that comes. Again, patience. Patience is everything. Said, this will probably be a quieter night than most nights, just because there's a lot of really tight marks that are going to go in here, and if I'm talking, they're going to get messy. So I do have to be thoughtful about that. I can answer questions; it's not a problem, but there are going to be some times that I'll be quiet as I'm working. I'm saying that as I'm doing like a really clean line. Maybe I won't need to be quiet. Maybe I can blather on and on all night.
I think people like it when you blather, Kevin.
Yeah. Jumping into the gun first, I'm kind of dreading, coming in tonight, I was dreading working on the gun. Figure out how I could avoid doing it tonight and push it off. But better to just get it out of the way. It's going to eat up a lot of time, and that's really my concern with it. There's some stuff on the board. Any medium in the paint, so the paint is not flowing. There's a lot of transparent color in these mixtures. If I put medium in the paint, the stuff would be completely see-through as I kind of draw it out across the board, and I don't want that. There's a lot of area in here where there's no drawing whatsoever, and I'm going to figure out where the marks go. And that's another thing. Like in here, I don't have to worry, but this gun, so much of it is lost under the initial pass of paint. Again, you see small amounts of paint. So I'm going to be swinging over to a little trick. Speed this up a little bit. So when you're working, moving from your painting to your palette and back and forth over and over and over is just part of the job, right? There's no avoiding it. But it does eat up a lot of time. And so what you can do is you can move your palette, a little bit of it anyway, up to your painting. There's actually a guy, I remember who has it, but they created a vertical palette that sits on on your easel. And so that you're not moving down here, but the movements are smaller. But for me, like as an illustrator, I would simply pull some tape together. I always want to make sure the back of it is not very sticky. This is painter's tape, it should come up with no problem. And all I'm going to do is put the tape on the painting, and I'm then going to move just a little bit of my value to there. And I make sure I kind of flatten it out a little bit. I don't want it falling off and landing in my painting. So, and that's going to allow me now to, instead of moving back and forth, to simply stay right up here and work. I just treat this like it's my palette. Again, this value is going to be the slow one. Of all of them, this one's going to move slowest. Once this is down, things will speed up, and as I move through the value scale, it's going to pick up, it's going to accelerate more and more as I move towards the lightest value in any given area. So even though this feels very slow to me at the moment, I'm not really thinking of it too much because I know that on the other side of this value, I'm going to be able to accelerate this. Again, just looking for landmarks. There's a lot of information missing here. I've lost a lot of info. Careful. Got fingers over here. Things I've got to pay attention to. Going back down to the palette. Gone out here. So I'm not really finding any marks out here. I have nothing, no landmarks. So just kind of figure out where this barrel continues. I'm just going to line this up with what's already down. Straight edge. This is a really nice way to create a straight edge. Yeah, it's a nice clean mark. Another one on the bottom. So I just want to make sure I've got that that's making sense, that if I follow it here, then I know that when I put it here, the same thing.
Got a question for you.
Yes.
When you lose your transfer and your landmarks, do you ever go back and try to draw your transfer again?
No, I don't worry about it. I mean, like, if I can see the transfer and it's really faint and I'm worried about not being able to see it as I'm painting, I might actually go and like take a white pencil and draw them back. And you've seen me do that on this painting, where I've gone in and I've like redrawn on top of what was on top of the paint with a pencil, with a white pencil. And it's just to help me get the stuff in. You can even go in and do it with a little bit of, like take a little bit of burnt umber and thin it down with some medium, and then use a brush and draw right on top of the painting with paint to reestablish your drawing, and let that dry. And then when you paint on top of it, you now have a better view of the original drawing or the original transfer. There's like no information out here. I can't see anything that's going on in the front here. So I'm trying to figure out where everything goes. It's very, very little information. Again, one little piece of information pops out here or there, and so I'm trying to capitalize on that. Figure out where it goes and how it relates to everything else. Again, there are some landmarks back in here that continue the whole length of the gun. So if I can grab those, they help. This edge here, come all the way through. So I've just got to get this lined up and make sure that I'm got that. I'll solidify that, and then I'll go in and I'll extend it the rest of the way. There down is actually this value. See, force of habit, I don't do this much anymore. So force of habit, I keep reaching down to the palette even though I have this here. So again, top of that, and I go to the bottom. These marks, they're pretty clean, they're pretty straight. Take your time when you do them. Before I make the mark, I check and make sure that the brush is running where I want it to run. Be careful about that.
Hey, Kevin,
Yes.
do the students get to see this painting in the school, or do you store it away between live streams?
Oh, no, they get to see it. The whole reason for photographing it is that I've got students that have come in and they're like, that have seen the live stream and they're like, oh, it looks so much better in real life. And so we started photographing it so that, not that the photograph is real life, but it gives you a better idea of what's going on in here. The angle of the video is not, it skews the image a tiny little bit. So the photograph, at least we know it's clean and sharp and straightforward. And so we just think it gives you a better sense. But yeah, the painting, seeing the painting with your own eyes is an experience unlike anything digital or even a photograph. And I talked about this last week. The light interacts with the paint. The opaque areas, the paint bounces off the surface. The areas that are more translucent, the paint permeates them, goes through them, bounces off whatever is solid underneath and is bounced back. So those areas are backlit, almost like a backlit television. And it has a very different look to it when it's backlit. And that's what the old masters did. They used a lot of glazing, and so their paintings were lit from behind, right? The glazed paint is actually illuminated from behind. Stuff doesn't go all the way up, but this is in there nice and clean. Again, always go to the bigger brush. Bigger brush. Just trying to make sense. I've got sense of this curve. If I can get the curve, then I can figure out the rest of the barrel going back, and then I can figure out what's going on in here. So it comes up to the middle. It's like here. And again, yeah, I know I've said this before. I talk to myself when I am working like this. Trying to figure out where everything goes can be a bit of a challenge. And it's like talking myself through it, I find helps. Interesting. I'm finding I put this in the wrong place. I made a mistake. I thought there was a landmark, and I was mistaken, and now I'm having to deal with that mistake. So this is wider. This notch down here belongs back in here somewhere. It's about half the length. So count for that now. This is here like this. Just trying to make sense of it now. There's a little bit of a here.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
We've got a conversation going on here in the chat about fake fruit for still lives.
Yes.
Have you found any fruit that you would recommend?
Fruit that I would recommend?
Well, like, I don't know, brands or
No. I get whatever's available. I'm not a plastic fruit expert. I get what looks good, you know?
Right.
If it looks like terribly plasticky, then no, I mean, that's not going to work, you know? But it's like, you know, I mean, a lot of these things, you buy plastic fruit, you look at it online, if it looks relatively real, it's probably going to be decent when it shows up. It may not be perfect, but it'll be decent. It'll do the job for, at least for working from direct observation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you want the look of real fruit, go buy real fruit.
And eat it afterwards.
Yeah, eat it afterwards. Just trying to make sense of what's going on here. All kinds of ins and outs inside of this muzzle. I don't have a drawing in here, so I'm just winging it, and I'll see what comes of that. I may wind up with something very different in here than what's in the photograph, which is fine, as long as it explains the form in a way that makes sense. It can be a departure. I can't just scribble in anything. It has to look three-dimensional. It has to make sense with the rest of the gun. But as long as it does that, it doesn't need to be much more. Let's try to place this. Darker value kind of wraps around the fingers. So you can see the fingertips a bit. Again, as we get these in and we start explaining the shape of the fingers, the hand will solidify as we start getting in here. So I'm feeling like, for the most part, that is my darkest value. I feel like it could take up a little bit more space on the bottom on here. So I'm going to that a little bit. Again, this helps me to keep it straight. It may not be perfect, but it's a lot better than I would do freehand. Steadies my hand. Even though there's a little gap in here on the gun, I'm going to connect these. It's an unnecessary detail, and it just seems kind of silly to have it there. Doesn't seem like it adds. The gun's feeling pretty solid now. I'm just going to look in here and see if there's anything in here to do with this black before I move on with this very dark shade. So in here, all of this is zipper, and then there's skin up in here. Now, if you look at the palette, you'll notice I mixed a lot of paint. I mixed it because I know that at least one more week is going to be needed from this, and so I've mixed nice big puddles. I've pulled them together into large things. They're not spread out. Like these will get used up, but these I will definitely need for next week, and it could even be the week after. And much like I was able to keep the paint in the background wet for 3 weeks, I'll do the same with these. I've not put anything into them, so there'll be nothing drying them. Once they skin over, they just stay nice and wet inside. And again, that's just me protecting against having to extend this out 3 weeks, and I don't want to have to rematch these colors. Not that it would be that hard to do, but since they're already mixed, mixing a little bit of extra, easy to do. Just looking for places where this darkest shade fits, even little marks. It doesn't have to be like a large area. I don't want to come back to this value in this area once I'm done with it. Here, and then I think I'm good out here. Everything is nice and straight before I start moving into other shades. I'm going to put this brush on the side. I'm going to grab another small brush and try to keep them one brush per value, just to make life easier. So actually going to skip this value. So I've got, can I see the palette? So I've got my darkest shadow, and then this is technically the first of my lights. This one is a mixture between these two. I mixed them. I took a little of this and a little of this and mixed it together. And I did that so that I have something to bridge what is a very dark, black, almost bluish shadow into a lighter, kind of plum-colored light. So I need something to bridge the gap. If I just put this down against this, it's going to make a mess. But this allows me to bridge the gap. It's half of this, and so it'll marry them nicely. But rather than do that, I want to step over this for now. I'll put this down, and then in the places that I need to marry these in a gradient, I'll put this in on top. And that should work nicely. But it'll also allow me to not have to go back and paint over areas where this isn't light enough. And because I know that I'm going to be using this next week, I'm keeping this paint as big and fat up here as I can. Just grab a little bit of this up here. And you can see the difference between these. It's a pretty big jump in color and in value. Basically, I'm just layering this on now. I'm going to put this down every place where we transition out of a shadow into a light. So I'm going to drop it into a lot of the reflections that are in here. It looks a lot warmer against these blues. As the canvas gets filled, you'll realize it's not quite as kind of orangish as it looks here. It's just that it's sitting against things that are so cool right now that it looks really orange, or kind of like brown. But it's actually quite plum.
Hey, Kevin, going back to the painting the transfer and losing landmarks,
Yes.
painting the transfer down to regain those landmarks with a faint color wash. When would you paint over them again? Would you keep them until the glazing phase?
Can you restate that for me?
So you were mentioning using paint as a kind of a wash to get your landmarks back?
Yes, to redraw.
And then when would you paint again? Would you wait for it to dry first?
It has to dry, so then it becomes a new drawing for you. It's just drawn in paint. And then once it's dry, then you can paint over it however you want, opaquely or transparently. It doesn't really matter, whatever you need. The idea is that all you're doing is reestablishing your transfer. So if you need a very subtle transfer, you keep the paint really thin. And if you need a more comprehensive transfer that's going to last through the application of heavier paint, then you need to make it a bit bolder. And that's all. That's all it is. You build it up to the degree that you need it, nothing more. And you bury it under paint when it's time to bury it, right? If you're working with a transfer, you know why you have a transfer. You know when you need it and when you can let it go. And so when you do your painting, that's it. You make it strong enough that it'll be there until you don't need it anymore. Right? And sometimes we miss the mark. We do our transfer, and then as we start painting, we lose the transfer. And so being able to reestablish it is a nice thing. I'm trying not to blend here. I'm trying just to lay the paint down side by side. Like I said, I have that other value the mix of these two to take out these edges.
And I've got another question here.
Yes.
Is alkyd an acrylic-like substance?
You know what? I'm actually not sure exactly what it is. I know that it has. spirits. Like Old Holland, I know has white spirits in theirs, but there is solvent in alkyd, but I don't know exactly what it is. I think the book that I have is so old, I don't even know if alkyds were around when it was published. They might have been, but I don't think they're in the book actually. With the book that I have with all the chemical breakdowns and explanation of what these products are and how they're made. I have a very old version of it. But yeah, I couldn't answer that question. I actually don't know the answer. But don't wash your hands with alkyd and don't eat it because it's toxic. It's got turpentine in it basically. It's actually it's in the Evolve program. It's actually the only material that we ship out that is toxic. Everything else that we send is you could eat. Don't eat it, but you could. It's just oil and pigment. But the alkyd is not good for you. Yeah, having a little bit in your studio, I wouldn't have open jars, but if you have a little bit mixed into your paint, it doesn't do anything. But again, like we stay away from solvents. We don't use turpentine to clean brushes. We do it just with soap. I think Daniel recently posted a video on that.
Yep. And about the alkyd, can you use alkyd and paint 50-50?
It's exactly the same as any other medium. So you have that rule about not doing more than 50% medium mixed in with your paint. But again, like you push 50%. It's a lot of medium. It's a lot of medium. Paint will be swimming in it. Find once I've drawn the lines in, it's easy to stay inside of them for the most part. Not necessarily perfectly, but close enough that it's not, the lines aren't going to look like they wobble to anyone viewing the painting. I could go in later on and use a like a bridge, lay something down and literally use it like a ruler, just draw the lines in on top to reestablish them and make them crisp. If I were doing an illustration, that's probably what I would do. Like, very end of the process, I would go in with very thin paint.
Following up on eating paint, comment here.
I shouldn't have said that.
Are you saying if I snack on the moderate light, I'll be okay? Because it's looking really good right now.
Absolutely not. Did not do that. But yeah, I mean, trust me when I tell you, it'll have an effect on your daily schedule if you do that. You won't be leaving your house putting that much oil into your system. But you can imagine what that would do. But it's not toxic. It's not toxic. You might get a little sick from it, but not like going to the hospital. Now, if you eat acrylic paint, that'll kill you, right? The acrylic stuff that you wash off with water, that's poison. Oil paint, not so much so.
And what are your thoughts on lead or flake white paint?
I like. I use a Kremitz white. It's much better than titanium. I don't use flake white. There's an issue with flake white. I stay away from it. I don't remember offhand what it is, but there's an issue with flake white. I do. I love Kremitz white. It's a great material. So much better than titanium. Like not even close. A world of difference. Titanium white is like, it's just overwhelmingly cool and white and opaque, and Kremitz white is there's a warmth to it and there's a level of transparency. It's not overwhelming. Kind of understands it's almost like it's part of a palette, where titanium white overtakes the palette. It wants to own the palette. Everything you mix in. If you take like one part of any color and you mix it into one part of titanium white and then the same amount of color into lead white, the lead white mixture will have a lot of color in it, and the titanium white mixture will look like chalk. And get a small tube of lead white, and again, saying lead, Kremitz white, and test it out for yourself. But I prefer to work with lead white. Also, it dries much faster, but it's warmer, it's more transparent. It doesn't have a very high tinting strength, so any color you put into it maintains its richness, and it dries quicker. Anything with lead in it dries faster. If I get the gun done tonight. I feel like I'm. So it looks like there's going to be 20 more sessions to get this painting done. Not. Everybody okay with that? Anyway, you're getting a little bit of a lesson on how to create straight lines here, if you can see it. How's the view for this, Daniel? You kind of make out what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a great way to make straight lines. You use your maul stick. It's got to be stable on one side so it doesn't slide. And then you try to level it out so it's about the same height at both ends away from the canvas, and then you just run the brush on it. Always test the angle first, and then I'll paint. That first stroke, there's no paint going down. I'm just testing to make sure that the angle is good. Like I said earlier, I feel the tension in my shoulders. I'm working here. Probably picked the wrong value. Probably should have gone with the intermediate value for some of this. I'm going to have to work over to knock it back. But I feel like this is too bright and too much of the gun. So there will be a correction for it. I'm generally holding my breath while I'm doing these lines. There's no way to get them done without.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
About the ivory soap and cleaning brushes, the sludge that comes off, like the soapy paint
Yes.
mixture,
Yes.
is that bad for the drains?
No, but it can clog. It can clog a little bit. So you do need to be thoughtful about that.
Mm-hmm. Nicholas had recommended wiping the sludge off onto a paper towel instead. Would you recommend that?
You can absolutely do that. I mean, we're constantly having to clean out our sink. Technically, the term for it is soap scum. I mean, we have to clean out the sink all the time because of it. It's just it's the nature of the soap and the oil. Just kind of winging the front of this gun there and kind of estimating it. Making some changes. There's some stuff on the front of the gun. I may put it in, I may not. I haven't decided yet. Again, I mean, so it's moving along, actually. It's moving along. Like I said, there's not a lot left to the gun once this stuff is finished.
Switching subjects here, question for you, Kevin. What was your favorite art period? This is from TY. He was sharing that his or hers is the Baroque period.
You know, I don't know that I have a favorite. There's some really wonderful stuff that was created at all different stages. Like you think about, it's easy to look, like even today, you look at some of the artwork that's done, it's incredible. But for the most part, we're not inventing it. We're building on what was already done. You go back, way back, when people first started using paint, they were inventing it, right? Each artist was inventing from whole cloth how to make a painting. And it's like, it's mind-boggling to look at some of that work and how incredible it was, how brilliant these people were that were inventing painting. And it's like, yeah, the painting itself, if you take it out of context and you put it next to a David, you know, yeah, it doesn't hold up. When you think about that, there'd be no David without those artists. You know, it puts it into some perspective. So I mean, I have a great appreciation for beautiful art. So it's not one period or another. Like if I had to pick a favorite artist, Bouguereau, David, I mean, those guys are high on my list. David was around during the French Revolution, and Bouguereau died in, I think, 1905. So he was, you know, mid to late 1800s. But if I had to pick like two of my favorite artists, I would say those two. But like I said, I mean, I love looking at good art, and so it doesn't matter where it came from, what time. It's you know, it's great to look at, and it's especially like when you realize, yeah, you look at the you know, when oil painting first hit the scene, you know, Da Vinci was around. Michelangelo didn't touch it, but Da Vinci was around, and he's still to this day one of the finest oil painters. He was inventing the techniques as he was going. How you can't take that away. I don't care how good art gets ever. You know, he invented a lot of what we do. He was the guide. His work has informed every generation that's followed. So I have an appreciation for that, and I think it's important. I think it's important to have an appreciation for it in that way.
Question from Becky.
Yes.
Do you ever look at impressionistic art and think it just needs a little more tightening?
No, I appreciate impressionist art, good impressionist art for what it is. It's not meant to be realism. If it were realism, it kind of defeat the purpose. And I got to tell you, like, creating a painting out of impression without putting the details in, the restraint, like the overall restraint of the human being doing that is pretty substantial. I can tell you from my own experience, I struggle I struggle, even if I start out with the idea of doing something looser, I struggle with keeping the details out of the paint. It always feels like there's just one more mark that needs to be made. And in the end, I wind up with the same kind of painting I always do. Now, unfortunately, people pay me for that, but as far as like doing impressionist work, I find it very hard because it never feels finished to me. But I do appreciate it when other people do it. So it's not like I think that impressionist art is unfinished. It doesn't feel unfinished to me. And again, we're talking about good painters, not just anybody, but people who actually know what they're doing, people who produce really good work within that genre. Because there's lots of bad artists or mediocre artists. I'm not talking about them.
So on that note, would you recommend that people try impressionistic painting? This comment from Nicholas, just wondering Kevin's thoughts on once in a while, just letting loose and explore paint and effects that it can make.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Expand your horizons. So you got to do it once like Nicholas, you're through the program. I mean, you really have a sense of what you're doing now. So your circumstances are different. I'm always afraid. I'll say, yeah, you should do that, and then somebody who's in block 1 and Evolve is like, oh, loosen up. Once you know what you're doing, then you're making artistic decisions about where to pull back and where to kind of lean into the work. And so, Nicholas, for you, because of where you are in the program, yeah, I mean, you're fine to do that. You would have no issue with it. It would be good for you. I think you would find it to be a lot of fun. I remember you had been working on a painting a while back. I don't remember which one it was, but it had started out, and it was really loose. I think it was a block 6. I think it was a speed painting. And it was really loose when you started it, and you kind of pulled it together. And I remember talking with you about it at the time, and you had told me that you were experimenting within the technique. It was one of the later pieces, in the block, and you just decided you wanted to experiment a little with it. But yeah, I mean, at this point, like, you know what you're doing. So yeah, by all means, experiment. Play around. It's meant to be fun. It really is. And especially like you're not looking to make a career out of it. It's meant to be fun, so make it fun. Let it be fun. Experiment, right? You have the right attitude. You don't go into the paintings worrying about making a masterpiece. You go into them kind of playing and just looking to develop and grow a little bit and enjoy yourself. Well, yeah, absolutely, go and do that.
Here's a question from William Branson.
Yes.
How does painting with egg tempera compare to oil, and would there ever be a case that it would be better than oil?
Well, so first of all, they are nothing alike. They have nothing to do with each other, except for that you make art with them. They're completely different materials, and so there's no real way to compare them. You can't make oil paintings that look like oil paintings out of tempera. It just is not possible. It doesn't mean you can't make really beautiful art, but it's not going to look like this. And they're so far apart, making a comparison between them. You can play around with them, like you can play around with tempera. A lot of illustrators actually like the stuff. It's quick. It allows really immediate results, and again, you're not going to be getting this kind of a polish, but you can create a really beautiful effect. It's not a material I work with. I have played with it a couple of times, and I found it challenging because I wanted it to do what I wanted to make the paint do what I do with paint, and it doesn't do that. And so, again, like making a comparison is very hard. So at this point, I'm looking at what I have here. I want to get this middle value in, the one that fits between these two. And then once I've got that in, I'm going to then soften what is here, knock it down a little bit, probably render a few hard edges, drop in some highlights, and then move on. Right, and so I'm looking for, like, in here, this is all darker than the rest of the gun. It's kind of a recess. So I want to push this back. Black to do some of that as well. Same up in here. This is all darker.
Got a great question here.
Okay.
Recently, I sold a piece and ended up resenting my client. Any tips on how to avoid getting attached to my art?
Well, don't sell your work if you're not okay with selling it. I mean, that's the starting point. Like, when you sell it, it goes away. It doesn't come back, right? Make sure you have a good photograph of it, a high-resolution photograph, and that it's color correct, and it's like, check it to make sure it's exactly like the original, as close as you can get it, before you let the original go. But look, I mean, you know, you make paintings. If you're making them for sale, that's the reality. And you just have to square yourself with that, right? You know, you're upset with somebody for giving you money for your time and labor. That's, you know, a lot of people would kill for that. You know, they'd kill to be in that position, that somebody wants to give them money for their work, right? And so just, like, you know, just like think about that. You're lucky. You know, I say luck. You're not lucky. Clearly, you're doing work that is good enough that somebody is willing to pay you for it. That's a nice place to be. A lot of artists would be envious of that. It's where they want to be, and they're not there yet, right? And so, you know, like, just again, if you're not okay with selling a piece, letting it go, don't sell it. Nobody's going to make you sell your work, right? And so, only sell it if you're comfortable letting it go. But remember also, like, something else to think about is that, you know, if you love a painting and somebody buys it from you, they must really like it because they're willing to part with the money that they've worked hard to earn in order to own it. So you be happy with the idea that somebody who's going to cherish your work has something that they've purchased from you that's in their home now for them to cherish, right? Be happy that your painting catches somebody's attention to the degree that they're willing to pay you to own it so that they have access to it whenever they want it. But it's a really nice thing. You should be very happy about that.
Now, Kevin, I believe you've actually been in a similar situation, though. You've told me one of your favorite paintings, or maybe it's not your favorite, but it's the one painting you wish you never parted with, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, I have a painting that I sold. I was not originally planning on selling it. I was doing a gallery show, and they were getting a bunch of these paintings framed, and I had this one painting that I was still on the fence. So I wasn't sure if I was going to put it in the show. I had it there because we were getting it framed just in case. And a gentleman came in and he saw the painting. He thought it was a print. It was an illustration. He thought it was a print. It was really smooth and just a beautiful subject. It was a young girl sitting on the bow of like a science fiction spaceship out in space. It just and it wasn't like dark blue space. It was a soft, warm pink with this beautiful star turnstile. It was a really nice painting. And the girl was quite golden in color. And this gentleman, he saw the painting and he asked me about it. And while I was standing there, he said, "I'm interested in buying it if it's for sale." And I wasn't really prepared for the conversation. I said, "Well, I mean, I guess, like, we haven't priced it yet." And he asked me what I wanted. I gave him a number just off the top of my head. It was a high number. And he was like, "Okay, I'll bring a check by later this afternoon to the gallery." And that was the end of the painting. It's the only painting that I wish I hadn't sold. When I think about that painting, I kind of miss it. But that's one is what I miss. I got paid well for it. Probably wouldn't have asked for that much if I had been planning on putting it in the show. But since I wasn't, it was kind of an off-the-cuff thing. I just threw a number out there that would kind of put the guy off. He dropped off a check later that day. So he came back, he bought 3 more paintings. So that was pretty good. He came back when we did the gallery show and just loaded up on my work. So may not have done that if not for getting access to that piece right up front. Part of it is he wanted to be at the gallery show so that he could kind of stand there while people oogled the painting he owned. Right? And that happens a lot. There's a lot of people that go to galleries if they've purchased something already. They just want to kind of watch other people react to the painting they own. But I'm just trying to figure out where I want these soft edges, where I want to create these gradients.
Another question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
Are acrylic paints more vibrant than oil?
No. Generally speaking, the pigments are the same. Pigments are the same, it's just what binds them. So no, cadmium red in oil paint and a cadmium red in acrylic, there shouldn't be any difference. If it's real cadmium, it's real cadmium. So the pigments are pigments. It shouldn't be any different. Realizing I will have to go back in and clean some of this stuff up. And again, you know, like I'm doing this, I'm sitting on the easel. Normally, if I were working, this painting would be sitting in my lap like this, but if I do this, you can't see what I'm doing. This is much more comfortable than this. So again, I'm a little bit clumsy as I'm working here because it is uncomfortable. My shoulder is tired already as I'm working. It's going to slow me down as I go. Hopefully not too much.
Do you have a painting size you like the most? 11 by 14, 18 by 24, etc.?
36 by 48 or bigger.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like the paintings big. I haven't worked on small paintings like this in many, many, many years. This is the size of a Head and Shoulders portrait. The head's 10 inches tall, right? So this would be a Head and Shoulders portrait, you know. And you go up from here, a 3/4 or half portrait, it's like 36, 3 feet by 4 feet. And so then to just continue to scale up from there. Yeah, I like working in large scale. Yeah, as I'm doing this, I'm kind of mixing these things together on here. Values that I want it to be. It's funny, like, it's always like for me, it always takes me a while to get these things established, and then once I get them established, then I can start to fly in the painting. It always takes a little bit of time for me. I don't, like, I'm nervous about making this too painterly and losing some of the linear aspects of it and having to go back in. And again, it's not that I can't do it, but I'm trying to retain as much as as much of the precision as I can in this for as long as possible, hopefully through to the end of the painting process. Again, like in this area, I learned like I really overshot the mark with that first jump. I should have gone to this one. And again, take off a small piece, you test the stuff out, decide where you should be, and then the rest of the painting then rolls out from there. You make the mistake, I mean, if you want to call it a mistake, once in a small space, and it informs you how to then move the rest of the painting forward.
Hey, Kevin,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on learning to draw in paint?
Oh, I think it's great. Again, there's this idea that drawing is with pencils and painting is with paint. Drawing and painting are basically the same thing. They're a skill set that you have in your head. It's not the tool that you use. The tool's irrelevant. It really is. Drawing is, again, is about being able to portray what you see. Right? That's what drawing is. Painting is about being able to portray what you see. And that's it. That's what both of them are, and so they're the same thing. The tool is not again, like we think in terms of drawing as pencils and painting as paint because that's what we were told as children, right? And we never become more sophisticated than that if not pushed to become so, right? And so, but drawing again, to me, you can draw with a brush, you can draw with a pencil, right? Pastels are considered, like if you can paint with pastels, right? But they're, if you ask most people, they're a drawing implement because they're dry, right? They're a powdered substance. They're more like a pencil or charcoal than they are paint. But when you work with them, you treat them like paint, and they can give you a finished piece of art that is as lush and rich as any painting. So yeah, I mean, anything that will make a mark is good to make art with. And you kind of get away from the idea of drawing or painting and just think in terms of making art, right? And there's a skill set for that, right? Which is what we talk about at Evolve all the time. Doesn't matter what the tool is. If you understand how value, color, and edge work, you are empowered to make art with any tool that you want, right? And which is the goal, the freedom to create whenever you want, whatever you want, right? And again, if you move from one material to another, there's a learning curve on the material itself. Like obviously, working with oil paint and working in a digital medium are two very different, the tools are different, but the thinking isn't. The thinking isn't different. Right? And that's really that's really where an education in art happens. Learning to see that these things aren't different. They're basically the same. That learning to do digital painting or learning to do oil painting, the knowledge that you need in order to be able to do it is the same. The interface is different, meaning the tool that you use. So in traditional, you're going to use oil paint, you're going to use a brush. In digital, you're going to do it, you're going to do it using a pen or tablet, whatever it is, right? And so, but the skills that you need, the understanding that you need in order to be able to make a piece of art, Same, no matter what tool is in your hand. So this area in the painting, I decided to fill it in as I'm going. I want to do a little test on it. So I worked everything up in here where what I did is I painted in the dark shades, then I put in the lights around it, the lights around that, right? I'm gonna build up. This area, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna drop in the shadows and fill the whole space and then render the other stuff right on top of it and see how that goes. I'm gonna do just a small space in here and see if it works out better. I have a suspicion it's actually gonna yield a nicer, easier result, right? So, right, I wouldn't do it if it gave me a lesser result, like I wouldn't use it across the rest of the painting, but if the result is equal or better, I will continue with it if it's easier, right? So I'm always looking for a better way of doing something when I paint that gives me an equal or better result for less work. So here I'm just knocking down the paint, making sure it's all going in one direction. I'm not going to be able to blend it so easily once I start drawing on top of it. This one will actually show up on top. We'll test it. Yeah, it's showing up nicely. Okay, so that'll go.
Question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
And I believe you've answered this one before. When painting commissions, would you paint the people in a more flattering way or exactly as the reference? For example, a bunch of fine wrinkles around eyes and dark circles, sagging skin, tricky chin areas, or skin texture?
So, yeah, I mean, I have answered this before, but I'm happy to answer it again. So, I don't take things out. I don't do plastic surgery unless I'm absolutely, it is demanded by the client. I believe that the way we look is the way we look. People recognize us that way, and though we may focus on these wrinkles over here or this thing over there, most people only take us as a whole package. You know, unless we have some like lump growing out of our forehead, they take us as a whole package. They don't see us for one little thing or another, though we scrutinize ourselves that way. And so for me, I might downplay wrinkles, right? So instead of a wrinkle on a face being a value 5, dark, I make it a value 3.5, so it's much lighter. So against the skin around it, it's not as pronounced, but it is there. It is there as it is on the person's face. Right? You can accentuate things and make them stronger, and you can knock things down a little bit and make them softer, but I try not to take things out. Again, if you take out all the wrinkles on an 80-year-old lady, you wouldn't even recognize her. So now you're not faithfully painting the person, you're painting some stranger. So what's the value of that? So to me, you can make those things beautiful if you paint them beautifully. And just be thoughtful, you know, like there are some things you look at them and they're unattractive. You tone them down. If toning them down doesn't do the job, then you take them out, but they can't be critical to the structure of the face. As an example, I have this furrow in my brow. It's been there forever, right? I mean, Daniel's laughing.
I love that furrow.
But if somebody painted me without it, it wouldn't look like me because it's always there. It never goes away. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like creases, but it's me. It's me, and I would look funny. If I saw myself without it, I think I'd look funny. And I think anybody who saw me, like it's at least around here, it's a distinguishing feature on my face.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you did a painting of me and didn't put it in and you showed it to like the people around here, they'd be like, that's not Kevin, right? And it's such a simple thing, and it's like, well, I could easily take that out and clean that, give me a little Botox, right? But it wouldn't be me. It wouldn't be me, and the people around me who know me would recognize that it was missing. So yeah, I mean, I tend to stay within what the person has. And again, you say, like ugly marks. Well, define ugly. Ugly for you? People look the way they look, and people around them have known them for their whole lives. They don't perceive them as ugly. So you think something is ugly. Who are you to judge? Like, who am I to make a judgment call on what is ugly and what is attractive? Right? I could have a client that wants to sit for me, have a portrait done, and I can think they're hideous. The people around them don't think they're hideous. They're just normal. It's Joe or it's Mary. They don't know who the person is. You know, they're not looking at it that way. They just know the person. And so you faithfully represent the person to the best of your ability, making the person, trying to show off what you think is most beautiful about them, right? That's really the job of a portrait painter, is to show off the subject in the subject's best light. Changing them and turning them into somebody else along the way is, you're no longer painting them in their best light. You're now painting an ideal version of them. It pushes the piece too far, in my opinion. There are a lot of artists that do that, but for me, I'm not a fan of that. If a client demands it, it's one thing, because I will always talk about that kind of stuff. But if a client absolutely demands it, then sure enough. And I can tell you, there were a couple of collectors, not portrait collectors, science fiction collectors, and in their home they had a portrait of the husband and the wife. They were separate paintings, and they were really beautiful paintings. And I had known the sitters for, wow, maybe like 5 or 6 years when I first saw the portraits. And I can tell you that standing in the room with the paintings and the people, I had no idea who those portraits were of. I didn't recognize either of them. I mean, that's terrible. What was the point of having the portrait done? It's not you, right? So, let people be what they are. Try to find a way to show off. And again, you know what standardized beauty is, but who the hell cares about that? Like most of us don't fall into what the standard of beauty is. We're just people. And so when you're painting, you shouldn't be defining for other people what the standard of beauty is. You let people be what they are, and you paint them beautifully. You go very far as a portrait painter if you can do that. It's work. Figuring out what makes somebody beautiful is work, right? You have to actually care to figure it out, so that you don't take out anything that matters and you don't put in anything that is unnecessary. So easy to define for others what we believe beauty is. And to me, like, that's not our job. And again, my opinion, that's not our job. But it is just my opinion.
Kevin, I made a stick figure caricature of you for our Pro Art Skills course that I had made.
Oh my God.
You're a stick figure with a square head, brown hair, and a furrowed brow. What else is there?
Yeah, see, there it is.
Nailed it. Look exactly like you.
And it's square head. Yep, that's me. You wouldn't recognize me. And that's the thing. Like, if you draw somebody as a caricature and they're recognizable, you're getting to what makes them look like what they look like. And then that's pretty good. Appreciate it. So that's out on the internet for the world to see.
That's right.
Lovely.
Forevermore.
Fired.
You threw me under the bus last week, so had to get you back.
Yeah, fired. It tells me what's going on with Evolve. I have to find out in live streams that I'm being having caricatures. That's good though. But you make my point, right? That that's I have these features that I'm easily recognized by them, and so you take them away, and I wouldn't be recognized, right? And even in a caricature, you can recognize me from them. It's good though. You'll have to share that with me.
You haven't seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, that's funny. Whoops.
Yeah, no, this is news. This is news.
Everyone involved loved it.
Oh, of course they did. Of course they did. Shouldn't have said anything last week about the throwing up in the gym, right? Getting back at me now. Wait a second, when was this thing drawn?
When?
Yeah, when?
I think I made it 7 months ago or something.
Oh, so it came first. So my comment last week was revenge.
Well,
Revenge for something I didn't know had been done.
yeah, you got me there.
No, I didn't know about that. I do have to see it. You have to send me a screenshot or something.
Okay.
I got to see that. It'd be funny.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, everybody involved loved it. Yeah. You did. Everybody's picking on me. Slowly working my way through some of this stuff. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this gun. And I may have sorely underestimated how much work this was going to be. I am not sure yet if I did that, because I'm still at the beginning stage. But once I get away from this value, this should just roll. Like when I jump up the next value, the value after that, the gun should just come together. But I do believe that I sorely underestimated how much work this was going to be. Just the gun alone. This not so bad, but the gun. Something like this in so long. I was having a conversation like what to do next. And it's like I kind of committed myself, not next, but kind of down the road. The next piece like this will have a dragon in it, I think. So if I do it, I'll be building a sculpture for it. So I'll build an armature and build it out of clay and photograph it. So I'll have finished reference of a dragon for the painting. Again, not locked in yet. Just saying it's kind of been pushed to do it. So
It's awesome.
yeah, we'll see how it goes. Check it out. It's a lot of work. Like this is a lot of work. Sitting in here, kind of. Stuff down. So I've got all these values in place. I want to start knocking them down. I want to get some of the excess paint off. There's a lot of paint on here, and so I want to just start grabbing some of my darkest shade and rolling it up into these lighter shades and taking out the edges in the places where there should be gradients. So this is going to allow me to take some of the texture out. Again, I'm not just pushing two drastically different values together. These are not a big jump, but I've already put this in between. So all I'm doing is kind of mushing them together. And I will watch the sharp edges. The sharp edges need to be maintained. But I'm just going to play around in here and try to take all of the soft edges down. And if I can, even grab some of my darker shade and drop it on top of anything in here that's too light. And that'll help to push the values back to where they belong. These things like this is too light. So having some of this darker shade from up in here on the brush as I work down into the light will knock the light down. It won't be quite as light against the darks around it. Again, just making sure everything is soft. Again, there are lots of sharp edges in here. I'm trying to be careful not to disrupt those. This is more about working on the edges that need to be dissolved. Keep wiping my brush. Every time you see the brush leave the screen, I'm wiping it. Getting whatever paint is on the brush off. This is allowing me to put a clean brush to the panel each time. Very carefully trying to make these gradients, pushing the paint around to get the effect. There's not a big jump. Like I said, there's not a big jump in here, and the intermediate values are in place. So it's just a matter of not moving the paint around too much that it starts to become mud. Again, I don't mind these edges being a little soft. I can go back in very easily in a glaze if I need to and make them razor sharp. Sharp edges are easy, very easy to impart into a painting. Making edges soft later on is a challenge. It's a lot of work. Taking a sharp edge and making it soft once the paint dries, it's a lot of work. So here, like I said, this is already a gradient. I'm just kind of pulling the paint across and smoothing it out. Same on this side. Very gentle as I'm working. Nothing heavy-handed about what I'm doing. There's a lot of paint down here. I applied quite a bit of paint along the way, and I want to make sure that it's smooth. I'll probably take a fan brush to it very gently once I've got it knocked down, right? So I'm going to knock it down with a small brush like this first so that I don't drag too much paint around. This gives me a lot more control. And then I'll use a fan brush just to make sure the surface of the paint is flat, right? I'm not using it to blend. I'm using it to flatten out the paint on the surface, to polish the surface of the painting. Make sure that I don't have any obs or excess paint sitting out here when I use that brush, because it'll just make an absolute mess of the painting. Constantly wiping the brush. So I can, hopefully, a fan brush will now take care of that for me. Just be very gentle. Again, if I do too much, it's just going to wipe everything that I just did. It's going to blur everything. That's not what I want. I mean, I want softened. I want the paint flat, but I don't want it blended. And this will blend a little bit, so it's kind of counter to what I want in that, but I'll sacrifice a little bit of blending in order to get the painting smooth. So there's pretty much, this is no texture in here anymore. Right, so I use this brush to start, and then I'll go to a larger fan brush, which will move even less paint, like this one. And this one I can just kind of pull everything. It moves almost no paint. I'm very gentle. I'm quick when I do it, but I'm very gentle. So that's now smooth, and it's nice and polished. Now I can go in and I can clean anything else up, drop in my next set of values, and then move on from the gun. Right, let me this in. Keeping an eye on my photo reference, making sure I'm getting everything in place. Again, a lot of these lines, there's nothing here in the painting. And I haven't been doing small paintings for a very long time, and so I'm kind of tripping up at the beginning stages of them. You've been seeing that as I've been working, tripping up at the beginning stages because I'm very much out of practice in doing this. And a bigger painting, like losing lines, and it almost doesn't matter. But in these smaller pieces where we got these very precise things like a gun, it matters. It makes a difference that the lines aren't here. If this were, let's say, a rope, it wouldn't be a big deal. But a mechanical thing like a gun, a knife, something that's crisp and clean, the transfer makes a big difference in the ease of getting the painting, getting the precise marks where they belong. Again, not absolutely necessary, but helpful, right? And so and helpful because it's less time consuming. And especially like considering that we have a limited window of time here, that matters. That's a big one, how much time this stuff takes. By the way, Daniel, how are we on time?
It is 9:45.
Wow, that's not good. It's late. This painting, wow, I'm getting nothing done today. Wow. This is going slow.
So what would you have done differently if you wanted to go faster?
You know, it's funny, like some of the technique that I use for something this small, it would be challenging. You know, part of it is also like I'm the way that I'm sitting, like all of the dynamic of how I'm here. If I could take this thing in my lap, I'd be able to move quicker. There's less strain on my shoulder. I can get closer. I can see, you know, and so the setup has an effect on it. Again, like I could lay this on the table and I could use a ruler for these edges and it would really speed things up. Things like that. Again, like now that I've got a sense of this, I should be able to move through these other parts much, much faster. Now, mind you, the gun will be done 2 hours into a 3-hour session. So, but I'll get a lot done. I should get a lot done once the gun is done. I should be able to really accelerate the pace once I've got the gun finished. Right, so.
Question about the fan brush.
Yes.
Kevin, you mentioned that it was a dangerous brush. And in this
Yeah.
comment here, my understanding is that it is a blending brush, which is what you are using it for. What painting techniques or uses would get you in trouble?
Well, I actually described this. So the fan brush, you know, like one stroke of the fan brush can make a painting that softens edges and it can look really, really nice. Kind of blends things better than most people do. It makes gradients softer and smoother. The problem is that the first stroke has this really beautiful effect, and the second stroke could have push areas of the painting into even nicer spaces with that softer edge. And then the third stroke could be one stroke too many, and now all of the beautiful detail, the sharp edges that you put in, which are one of the elements of a good painting, is sharp edges. Those sharp edges are now wiped away. All of your details, all of your marks. Like so, you know, if you have paint and you put it down, let's say that you here's your line in your transfer and you fill. When you use the fan brush and you drag it back and forth, if the line that you're trying to fill to is here, your paint could wind up here. It can migrate. And you wouldn't know it because the paint is covering the line. And so if you push one portion this way and one portion this way and one portion this way, everything starts to stretch. And you're taking out all of your hard edges while you're doing that. So you don't have any anchor points in your painting, right? And so fan brushes, they tend to blur paintings. Everything becomes out of focus. Like it looks really nice at first, but then you realize like all of my hard edges are gone now also. And so all the blurred or really softened gradients look beautiful, but the things that bring the painting into focus are now gone. And those things, those are the places where you need to be precise. A gradient here doesn't need to be as precise as the shape of my eye. And so these are all hard edges where this would be a soft gradient. And so if you go over everything and you soften this and the edges migrate, now my eye is not where it belongs, it's not the shape that it's supposed to be, and unless you really know what you're doing and you can place those marks properly with a crisp stroke, you've lost your painting. And recovering it is not easy. You're almost better off going back and wiping off and just starting back on your transfer from scratch. So, and again, it's not like, the first stroke with a fan brush is beautiful and the second is nice and then it gets a little worse and a little worse. One stroke could be great, two strokes could be great, the third one could ruin your painting. And you don't know until you've dragged the brush that third time, or the fifth, or the eighth, or whichever stroke it is. Most people, when they use the fan brush, when they're inexperienced, will always overshoot the mark and ruin their paintings. I mean, I've just seen it so much. And so I recommend that until you really have a command over your tools, you stay away from these brushes. I've done this for 30 years. I've been using this little black brush, which most are, it's a hobby brush. I've been using it. I've been using it for like 26, 27 years. I used it when I was an illustrator. And so like I'm very comfortable with the tool. But again, the fan brushes, they make a mess. They make a real mess of a clean painting. If you want, right, the idea of a fan brush, like if you're going to use it, it blends, it makes gradients. Well, do the labor and make the gradient properly. Don't depend on a fan brush to do the work for you. Do the work properly. Build out your scale and lay the values down side by side and soften the edges properly so that you don't require a tool like a fan brush. A fan brush is a shortcut. That's what a fan brush is, in my assessment, until you know what to do with it. It's a shortcut. It's a way of not having to do the labor of making a gradient by hand. And so, if you don't make gradients by hand, you're going to produce gradients. Like a fan brush will give you what it gives you, and you'll just get what you get. Learn to do it properly by making the paint do what you intend, not by getting lucky with a fan brush. And that's really how I feel. The fan brush, you get lucky if you get it right. Until you really know what you're doing. But fan brushes ruin more paintings than just about anything else. They're really a terrible tool. Or they can be. I'm going to try to pull this gun together and kind of finish off what is going to be done on it for tonight, so I can get into some of her. Again, like some of the stuff on the gun, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to tighten it up in a subsequent pass. It'll be really thin paint, kind of glazed in. Be able to render some really crisp, clean details. It'll be easy on top of this wet paint on wet paint. You really have to go in and kind of render the details mark by mark if you want to get them wet into wet. And the truth is, like, I just don't paint like that. I know how. I used to do it. It's how I did all my illustrations, but I don't paint like that, and I haven't for many, many years. I'm trying to show you all these different techniques, even some that I like. I might do this kind of work for like 5 minutes in a 60-hour painting, because this is good for certain things, but I wouldn't render a whole painting this way. Like I said, I didn't do the face this way. But the face is a larger scale. It allows me to move. This, I can't really move the brush. I can't make the brush move across the canvas. It's got to be like meticulous marks. And so a lot of my normal technique is not, it's not possible to even use in here. Let's see what we can get in here. And the gun is pretty far along. It actually is looking pretty good. Now it's just pulling out a few highlights, and then I'll be able to move on. Again, I'm building these up. I'm not just jumping into the final value. I want to build up. I want to be careful not to overshoot the mark. I don't want to, or put something in that I have to wait for it to dry to overwrite it later. Again, some of these things I'm just hinting at them, they're not detail marks. They might look like it, but they're not. They're just stroke here, stroke there. Again, you see me, I'm looking back and forth to the reference all the time, making sure that I'm thoughtful about the marks that are going down. This is metal, so we recognize it by how crisp the marks are, the highlights, and how precise the marks are. Everything is very mechanical, right? So it's a value. How big is the value jump? Metal reflects light. Big is the value jump in the highlights tells us how hard the material is. Very gently, just kind of, again, knocking down texture, nothing more. Skin in here, this hand is defined, this is all good. Okay, a couple more to drop in. See, these are not big value jumps. I'll be able to build these highlights later on when the paint dries and I lay this on top. It'll it'll be more, it'll maintain contrast better. This is it's a good starting point. It's reasonably, they feel mechanical. Any texture. The gun doesn't feel like it has any texture. It's really smooth. Much brighter highlight out here, but I'm not going to worry about it for now. It's going to be dropped in with a value I haven't mixed yet because it's backlighting. It's not part of this color scheme. Now you want my brush to help make this gradient. Blend the stuff together. I add the extra value in. That right there. Oh, are we on time?
It is 10:03.
Okay. Let's see if we can make up some ground now. I'm just going to go in here. This arm is in front of this, and so I'm just going to knock this down a little bit. I want to soften it. So this is blurred behind this. When I put this on, it'll be sharper. Just make sure everything is smooth. I don't like ridges in my painting. Always take my paint down. I'm gentle, very, very gentle when I do this. And I'm careful, I don't want to do too much. This softened more than I wanted it to. Just literally one stroke. It's a great example. This is softened. The rest of it's nice and sharp, and that one area softened a little bit more than I wanted, and it was literally one stroke. It's even like I hit it a few times. Okay, so looking for a place to jump in here. I think I'm going to leave this arm alone. I think I'm going to try to get this body and this. Just looking at what I can fill and work quickly through. Sense of everything. Shapes. Again, even though it's my transfer, it doesn't mean that I know exactly what I meant when I put marks down. I have to be thoughtful about what I'm doing here in the initial marks that go down. Because I'm working with these small brushes, I'm picking up like it's so easy to wind up with a brush loaded with paint unintentionally. Like all of this, I think I can take this entire area and fill it and then do it the way I did the gun. Just looking over, I want to see how far can I push that? Right? I don't see very much room, so I can push it out. Be able to just draw back into it. Mind just drawing on top of this. Losing the transfer is not a big deal. I'll do a small section at a time so I can keep my head about me. I'm not trying to tackle too much at once.
Mary Jo just shared, I cannot express how grateful I am for your transparency. It is where we really learn. It has helped me deal with my fear.
Oh, yeah, watching me trip and fumble around on this stuff, yeah, it's great. Actually, it's to me, it's important that I do that, and you're welcome. I mean, I think that because students don't realize that it doesn't matter how much you know, you still have to do the work, and it's just as easy for me to struggle as anybody else. I I really thought I was going to blow through this tonight. I was mistaken. I'm not going to get nearly as much done as I expected. And it's a good thing that you see that. Look, I mean, you sit down and you're like, I'm going to get this done. And then it's like it doesn't go to plan. Well, sometimes it's just how it is. And it's okay. Like, you just take it in stride. I mean, it's like, for me, there's actually pressure to perform here. Like, I have people sitting around watching, like, 3 hours, he's going to get all that done? Oh, wait a second, he just got the gun done, right? And it's like, well, this means we're adding another week to the painting, at least. Maybe more, because if this one's so slow, I mean, it may be 3 weeks to get the figure done, maybe 4. I may have really, really underestimated this. I'll think about it like over the next week before we come back to it, and try to resolve whatever tripped me up. But yeah, I mean, it may just be that this is going to demand that much time, and it's okay. It's completely fine. So, like, I'm getting cramps in my hand from painting the way that I am. When I was an illustrator, I used to get that. Painted for too many hours, and mind you, like 2.5 hours is not too many hours. But I am getting these like muscle cramps in my hand. Been a while since I decided to just take off a much bigger bite here. I think from the standpoint of sharing what's going on in my head, how things are working when things don't. Right? It'd be so easy to just disguise it and kind of, make excuses and things like that to kind of protect the impression of just being able to roll this stuff off the brush. But that's, I think that the difference between pros and amateurs is that, like, it doesn't matter how long this takes, I know I'll get the result when I'm done. I'll get exactly what I want. And so there's no worries, right? And amateurs, people who are learning, when you get into a place and things aren't going to plan, it's so easy to become overwhelmed with the idea that you don't know what you're doing and you're not going to be able to get it done. And that's not the case. Most of it is just sometimes things just don't go to plan. And at that point, all you have to do is reformulate. Build a new plan from where you are. Not from where you started, but from where you now are. Where am I? Stop. Take a breath. Where am I? Where do I want to be? And now how do I get there from here? It's like GPS. You take a wrong turn, it recalculates. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm kind of recalculating for, like, I know what I expected and I know what I'm getting now, and they're two very different things. And so what can I do? Now, I'm probably not going to be able to affect any change in what I'm doing now, but or next week, hopefully I'll come back prepared either with a different way of going about this to speed up, or with an acceptance that this is not going to go any faster, that nothing I do is going to speed it up because this is the speed this painting is going to go because of what's in it, and either way, that's fine. I don't have a problem with either one of those. It's not like I've got someplace to be. My goal is to be here every Thursday night doing these. So it doesn't matter if one of these takes an extra week or 3 weeks for that matter. And again, like I never sit down to paint when I have to be someplace on the other side of an expected amount of time. Like if I think something's going to take me 3 hours, I don't sit down at 12 o'clock knowing that I have a 3 o'clock lunch, because that's just asking for trouble, right? I would maybe have a 7 o'clock dinner and I'll sit down at noon to do a 3-hour thing. And if it takes 5 or 6 hours, it's fine, right? But I'm never sweating when I have to be finished. Sit here and I just let it take what it takes. Because whether I like it or not, that's what the painting is going to do. The painting has its own mind, at least in that way. Just because you want to get it done in a certain amount of time doesn't mean that it's okay with that. And it's going to win out every time. So you may as well just surrender to that reality and be comfortable with the fact that when you work, painting is going to take what it takes. That's all. And once you accept it, it's fine. Like it'll never bother you again, and it'll never chip away at your confidence as you're working, because you're in the process. It'll take what it'll take, but at the end, if you just keep working, keep doing what you know to do, painting will be what it's supposed to be when you're done. When you put the brushes down at the end of the day or the end of the painting, it'll be exactly what you intended, or within your skill set, right? You'll know what you're capable of because you'll have done it before. And this painting that you're working on currently will be just a little bit better than the last one, as long as you keep your head about you while you work. And so, that's this, okay. Looking for landmarks where this shadow falls. So I kind of take out the edge of the sleeve in the places where it doesn't need to be visible. Just kind of marries this together. And again, I'm not trying to separate it if it's not separated in the photograph. I just let it come together. What time is it?
It is 10:15.
Okay, I'm actually going to drop in all the shadows all the way up to this side. So I'm going to take one of those lurching steps, and I'm just going to assume I can get this all knocked out. Right out. I think that I have enough time. So. careful not to start picking up the pace. My assessment that I have 45 minutes and that I can get this done is that I am doing it at the same speed for 45 minutes. The moment I start speeding up, I'm going to start making mistakes. And mistakes are costly where time is concerned. Mistakes always take a lot longer to fix than if you'd just done it right to begin with. That is the nature of them. Going back to the thing about kind of letting you see me fumble around and figure things out as I go, I think that that's it's evidence that I'm not showing off. I'm not trying to make myself look like something I'm not. I'm trying to let myself just be a worker. You know, I'd read somewhere once that Rembrandt compared himself in some ways to like a shoemaker. You know, it was just a labor. It was a skill, and you had very, highly skilled shoemakers, and then people who didn't care as much that made lesser quality shoes. And so he thought of himself as a laborer, like in that way. He was an artisan, but a laborer at the same time. And it's an interesting way of thinking about what we do. This is a trade. It's like carpentry. Really not much different. We work with our hands, construct. So, again, staying humble, I think it's very important. It's important to what we do, not getting ahead of ourselves with. It means a lot to us, but it's a skill like anything else. That gun off for a while, like in the process. So this is moving really smoothly. I should say that. I should keep my mouth shut until it's done. But it seems to be moving along relatively smooth. I'm getting a lot of ground covered. It won't take much to get this done. Shouldn't anyway. Actually, as I'm working on this, I'm now eyeballing this arm also. It'd be nice if I could get out there. If I can get this done, the only thing I would have missed tonight was this arm, which is actually pretty good. this dark against this light. It's in the painting.
It is 10:20. Go for
Go
it.
big or go home.
That's right.
Okay. It's out. So a moment ago, I was talking about being humble. What you're seeing is hubris. This is going to turn into a late night if I'm wrong.
Oh boy.
It's not going to. I'm not. I'm actually not. I'm not worried at the moment. Now that I'm actually moving, I may run a few minutes over, but it will be just that, I think. This is so nice. I've been waiting to see this. Thing is, I know there's a ton of shadow in here. So much of this, there's no details at all, and so I'm confident that I'll be able to move through it quickly. And I could be wrong. It's fun. It's a bit of a challenge now. Jumps. The blue is so nice now. Still working lots and lots of missing trails. So I'm just kind of sense of it. Once I got these shadows in, this should be pretty cool. There's lots of little like dots and things on this, which I'm not putting in. It was never my intention to paint them. Necessary details. It's just a matter of the armor that I purchased had this stuff in it, but not something that I would. I don't think it moves the painting forward. It's a lot of needless work, right? I don't shy away from work, but I also don't waste my time on things that don't make the painting better. And so I don't think it moves the painting to have it in, and it's a lot of work. So, years and years ago, I did a cover, for those of you who are familiar with the Magic, the card game. I did a cover for one of the, for their first book, actually. I had a painting with these two wizards dueling, and there were like 9 skeletons in the background. And was a so he was deals in raising the dead and that kind of stuff, and so he's got this army of skeletons, and very tight deadline on it. And I had a friend, fellow illustrator, Stephen Yule, great stuff if you want to look him up. It's Stephen, Stephen, and the last name is Yule, Youll, incredible illustrator. But I was talking to him because he's very quick artist, a very quick illustrator. And I was talking to him and I asked him, I didn't know how I was going to get all these skeletons done. And so I gave him a call to see if he had any advice on how I might move through them quickly. And he asked me to describe the piece a little bit better to him. I described everything to him. And he said, well, why don't you paint in, like, say, 4 of the skeletons with the background color? And I was thinking like this, like blue background, blue skeletons, right? And so I questioned that, and he said, no. Use the background color and cover over 4 or 5 of the skeletons. Why are you painting 9 skeletons? Don't 4 or 5 make the point? Do you need 9? And, and it's like, that was a good lesson. Like, they were unnecessary. I didn't need what I'd put in. They didn't move the painting forward. And in the end, when they printed the book, they were giving away 2 magic cards with the book. And so they put this big orange metallic symbol right over all of the skeletons. So the fact that I took them out made no difference. So, but when you're working, like, if it doesn't move the painting forward, like, you don't want to get lazy, but if it's not moving the painting forward, what's the point of putting it in, right? And so just be thoughtful of that in your work. Because you can, just because something's in your reference, just because you can paint it doesn't mean you should. It doesn't necessarily belong, Just always be thoughtful about that. The painting is yours. You do with it what you want. Again, I don't say that, like, some people will take that to be, well, if I don't feel like painting something, I shouldn't. I can be lazy about it, but it's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if it doesn't move the painting forward, if there's no net positive for putting it into the painting, then what's the point of it? If it doesn't make the painting a better painting, then why put it in, right? Because the painting, we want the best painting that we can produce. If something doesn't make it a better painting, then why do it? It's a waste of time. Get your painting done a little sooner, move on to something else meaningful. So I think that's pretty good for my shadows. Again, before I move on, I want to make sure that everything that I want in here is in.
Good question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
How do you train yourself to stop seeing details first?
Well, so if you're an Evolve student, basically you're already on the path to that. The way you're being trained is getting you away from a detail-oriented approach to making art, right? In block 1, you're looking for shadows. Shadows aren't details, they're shadows, they're big shapes. Then you're looking for lights, then you're looking for gradients, reflections, and highlights. At no point you ever paint a detail, so you stop looking for them. The details emerge in the painting from the decisions of those big categories. And so you're being trained to not look for details already. And basically that's it. Like, your training is what does it. If you're trained to not look for details, you won't look for them. If your process, if it doesn't ask you for them, why would you look for them? And if you are, and this is why most untrained people, that's how they work, because they've not been taught to look at the bigger picture. So they work thing to thing to thing. It feels safer and it makes sense. Like, I can figure out this little thing and then figure out the one next to it and the one next to it. Just kind of bridge the gap. Thinking more broadly requires some confidence and a means to move from broad, big shapes to smaller and smaller and smaller ones, right? Because there's no such thing as a detail. Like, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to get back to painting, but there's no such thing as a detail. This is actually very important. In your painting, there are values, colors, and edges, right? And so we do a color value choices, right? And then the edges that connect them up here. What you think of as a detail is something that has a value, color, edge in a very small space, right? You have a value color against a value color in a very small space. That's a detail. Because if we took that and we blew it up, it would just be this big value here against this big value here with either a sharp or a graded edge. When we scale it down into something small, we think of it as a detail. But it's just more of the same thinking, just in smaller and smaller spaces. That's all it is. And if you think of them that way, there's no reason to ever paint a detail. All you do is paint the value color edges, the value color shapes, and then the edges that connect them. And again, but that's in the education, that's how you're taught to think. And if that's how you think over and over and over and over as you're painting in your education, eventually when you're let loose, that's how you think. And so you don't see the details first. You don't even see the details later on. They kind of emerge in the painting through the process, not through an intent to put in a detail.
It's 10:32.
Okay. There's music for this now. Do that, Bo. No music. So I'm going to get everything blocked in with this shade, and then I'll go back on gradients. I'll gradients from my darker shade into this one, and then start building if are necessary. If I get all the form in, but I don't get the details, that's no big deal. Very easy for me to drop them in next week. And actually that's why I'm confident jumping in and grabbing that arm also, because I don't have to put in the details. All I have to do is get the form in place. The lights, the shadows, and the gradients and the sharp edges, the big ones. The details I can drop in on top later on. I don't have to do them like I did the gun. And in truth, had I done the gun the way that I'm doing this gun would have flown. I could have done all of this in one shot, and it wouldn't have, we'd only be about 90 minutes in. Again, it's been a while, and I got to figure out how best to tackle this. Again, I had a plan. Plan didn't go the way I expected, and now I've just course corrected. And again, I'll think about this more over the week to see if there's a better way of going about this, and if so, I'll bring it to you next week. You'll see it. We'll talk about it. Again, I mixed a lot of paint. This paint is going to be sitting here waiting for me next week, ready to go, which is nice. Be able to pick up right where I left off. Be able to paint right on top of what's here. In case I want to make some changes. And if I had to mix this over next week, I can't guarantee that the colors would be exact, so painting on top of this might look funny. It might not work out. So having this stuff pre-mixed, having it carry over for another week is nice. And again, if I'm careful with it, it could last 3 or 4 weeks. Expect that I'm going to need it that long, but I'll do my best to preserve it, just in case. I mean, even the palette for the background, I still have it, just in case. There's enough paint on there that if I need it a little bit, I can get it off that palette. This is just a little bit of planning ahead. It's interesting, like you look at the palette, look at how dark this is. Can they see the palette? Look at how dark this is. But look at how light it looks on the canvas, on the panel. Such a departure from the black. Just give me a price of the time as we go, okay? I just want to make
Sure.
sure I get this done.
It's 10:37.
Again, I'm just going around and making sure with the smaller brush, I'm making sure all of these edges are seamless. I don't want to have any gaps, this blue showing through. Too much excess paint floating around here. I have to go in with a fan brush and knock this all down a little bit. I don't want gap. Big brush is fine, but this will go in and it'll allow me to make sure the edges are where they are supposed to be. Okay. I'm going to do an admixture between these two shades so that I can bridge the gap. This is so much more of a jump than I expected it to be here. This doesn't look so broad here. Go with the black and just kind of into this. Yeah, I guess that's the way to go. Yeah, so I just grabbed some black and I'm just now pushing back in and allowing it to make a gradient that way. Again, not the way I would have thought to go. I figured an admixture would work well, but it's not really doing the job. Create a gradient, and then I'm going to pull this over and darken this. And I'm basically just mixing my black from here into the brown that I just put down, or the plum color that I just put down. Just change the value. What's going down right now is the black mixing with the lighter shade that's down. Doing this, any other questions?
If anyone has any questions for Kevin, now would be a great time.
Using the black, it's actually blending really nicely. It's creating really soft gradients pretty quickly. The admixture just wasn't doing it, but putting the black into it is actually working. It's working nicer than I expected. I wouldn't have normally gone straight to the back to the original shadow to create these midtones or these transitions, these gradients. I would have created an admixture, but the mixture here between this and this on the panel is actually working out beautifully. And one of the nice things about that is it's actually allowing me to pick up some speed also, just when I need it.
It is 10:42.
Little variations in here, which is nice. I'm just worried about creating form now, making it feel three-dimensional, kind of rolling everything around the form of her body, creating those gradients, right? The gradients are what give the impression of form. So I'm trying.
So everything in the torso is just two values so far?
Yeah, it's just two values. That's it, nothing more. Black to go the whole way down this outer part of the arm, but it actually seems like the right shade now as I'm working. A little bit of the red into it, but it's actually feeling like the right shade. This is just more about, and again, you look in here, there's not a lot going on. Just got to get a little bit of a rounded form going on in there. And that should suffice. Again, I'll be able to pull some stuff out later on, some details. I'll be able to do that subsequent pass. Should be really nice. Again, they'll just be almost like lines right on top of what's here. So I'm just going to grab a fan brush and just knock this stuff down a little bit, make sure it's smooth. Oh, man. Not much going on here. I'm not worried about like over blending now because there's really nothing going on here. There's just these two values. Right now, I've got some gradients and some sharp edges, but I know the sharp edges are going to get completely overhauled in my next pass. So I'm not worried. I mean, my big thing is just making sure everything is smooth. I'm going to start pulling these things out. I'm going to do it now. I'm not going to just leave it. When I'm due my side of my really dark stuff, I've got some lighter lines, stitching and things like that. So I want to put that in first, like back in here. All right, so I want to make sure. First one starts about here. Where does it go to?
Dorinda shared, just want to send a huge thank you again. I was a bit on and off tonight, but still got so much from it. Your generous spirit is a gift as much as what you share.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm just looking for landmarks to figure out where these marks go. Between them, once I've got the big one. Giving the impression of some stitching. And this stuff just breaks it up. Makes it look kind of official. It's just space in here. It wouldn't look like anything, but now this makes it look like there's all kinds of like stitching and there's places where the armor comes together. These things nice and nicely spaced.
Yeah, a lot of these details are hard to see over the camera, but we'll take a nice photo at the start of our next stream for everyone to see.
Yeah, we'll get it for you. Sense. these marks aren't showing. Well, you get an idea of like the care that I'm taking. It's down. You see the photograph of it, it'll make sense. But how much care I'm taking as I'm making these marks. I'm not even being overly meticulous. I'm making sure the marks are doing what they're supposed to do, but there could be such care, like I did in here, like such care in these marks. I don't think they're necessary in here. Be able to tighten some of them up later, and so that'll make a difference in the overall painting, and it makes it so that I don't need to do them all now.
It is 10:52.
Okay, we're gonna run just a couple of minutes over, not much. Stitching. They're just kind of tapped in lines. You know, but our brain expects, like, our brain will tell us that this is stitching because it knows what stitching is. It's reasonable to expect some of it in here. So our brain will fill in the blanks for us. As long as it does a good job of approximating, expect to see.
Kevin,
Yeah.
when you have been away from painting for a bit, how do you get back into the saddle, so to speak?
You know what? You just start painting. Like that's what you do. You sit down and you start painting. And it doesn't matter if the painting is, you know, if it's something big or small, just kind of break free of the cobwebs. You just sit down and work. I mean, that's it. It's no magic. You know, it's like, you know, if you haven't been in a swimming pool in 2 years and you jump in, yeah, the water's a little uncomfortable when you first hit it. And it's not even about temperature, it's about just you're not accustomed to being in that environment. Stay in the water 5 minutes. It all comes back. No different with painting. You know, this is a knowledge-based skill. This is actually very important. It's a knowledge-based skill. It's like adding. Adding is a knowledge-based skill, right? Once you know how it works, you don't have to practice it in order to be able to do it, right? And the circumstances of the adding are not important because you understand how adding works. And as an example, right, we've all, I'm going to paint while I talk. We've all learned how to add two one-digit numbers, right? We all know how to do that. 1 plus 1, right? It's 2. 3 plus 4, 7, right? And so when we've practiced doing, when we were kids, we practiced doing two-digit numbers, right? You know, 15 plus 17, you know, things like that. We've practiced that. And so we know, you know, we can do those because we're practiced. But we learned how adding works. And so if I give you, let's say, 100 100-digit numbers, 100 numbers across, 100 numbers down, you could add that, even though you've never, ever done it in your life, because you understand how it works, because it's knowledge-based. So painting is knowledge-based. Once you understand how it works, you don't have to practice it because you understand how it works. It'll never go away. You can get rusty, but it'll never actually go away because it's all based on understanding. And if you understand the ideas, nobody can take that away from you. Time doesn't take that away. So once you've got it forever. So it's just a matter of like getting over your apprehension about sitting down and just getting in the chair and working. And if you do that, you'll be fine. It's easy to be paralyzed by the fear of not being able to deliver, but there's no reason to not be able to deliver, right? Again, we go back to the same thing. If you understand how values and colors and edges work, doesn't matter if you've been away from them for a while, you understand how they work. You know how to build a painting using them. Yeah, you may be a little rusty. Your color mixing might require a little bit of time to settle back in. Your hand might shake a little bit, things like that. But in the end, producing a quality painting, even the first time out, should not be that hard. Yeah, you're going to finish the painting and be like, well, yeah, there was some missed opportunities in there. I forgot about some stuff. But overall, the painting should be just fine. It's more about the fear of failure than anything else. And, there's no reason to be afraid of failure. Just get in and paint. Like, paint, that's it. Just do it. You'll find that once you settle in, you'll forget that you haven't been doing it for a while. I'm going up one more value in the scale, and then I'm going to stop. It's going to be going in less and less places. It's only going to be going in a few places. Is that I want those hits.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Do students paint directly without any underdrawing in Block 8?
My students work from direct observation all the way through. They never stop working from direct observation. In the school, every other painting they do is from direct observation. I think that is very important. Now, in Block 8, so when somebody's doing a Block 8 painting, after they finish it, they'll do a painting from life, and they can choose to do it, to do something at the level of a Block 8 painting. That's their choice. I don't tell them what to do. You get to that point, you're making up your own mind about what you want to do and what you want to paint, right? Because my job is to teach you how to paint, not to force you to paint anything. My job is not to force you to paint stuff that I want you to paint, right? Once you know what you're doing. When you're learning, you have no choice. I'm giving you the things because we're solving problems, finding deficiencies in what you know and teaching you how to get around them to be able to make art. But once you know what you're doing, it doesn't make a difference to me what you work on. What my students work on is really their choice. And so I don't force them to do anything other than the fact that in between each painting they do from a photograph, they do one from life because it's good for them. It keeps their skills sharp. And even if they never do a professional piece from direct observation, having the skills is important. I talk about this all the time, that it's not just like being able to paint from direct observation is more than just that. It builds neural pathways in your brain that enable you to see things. And the better you are at it, the better you can see. It's not that, so you get better at seeing by doing it. And by getting better at seeing, you become better at doing it. Right? And it's like, so there's a really wonderful benefit to staying on top of that stuff and not letting it slide. Again, when students get to a certain point in here, I'm not forcing their hand. They come in because they want to. They've been educated, and now it's like, well, what do you want to do with your education? Right? And I for the most part, I let them be. But I can tell you that I always encourage, working from direct observation between each photograph that they work from, because I think that it's important.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I think the question, though, was about painting directly, so direct painting.
Oh, in Block 8, people can do whatever they want. They can use whatever application they think is best.
There's multiple techniques that they can choose from.
Yeah, so
and combine.
we have direct painting, we have vacant shadows, what we call speed painting, and then puddling. And you can use any of them or all of them or mix them or blend them, whatever it is you want. Once you know what you're doing, you're free. You're free to apply what you think is best in each circumstance, right? And that's the goal. The goal is to get free to create. And so, yeah, I mean, students can use whatever techniques they want once they get there. I'm just gonna try to push this thing over the finish line as much as I can. These things that I want to keep relatively soft, I want to be able to lay them in now so that all the edges go in wet onto wet. And again, I'm just dropping in a few little notes, trying to get a little bit more push and pull, like a little bit more depth inside of the armor itself. The armor itself is not flat, and so I don't want it to feel flat. I want it to feel like it's got some form.
It is 11:02.
Okay, we'll be done in just a couple of minutes. Just kind of scouring this, looking for places where just a little bit more of a push. It's supposed to be a gradient. Is a gradient. Again, this is working out a bit looser than what I had originally intended, but that's fine. It's still doing exactly what it's supposed to do from the standpoint of any last questions? I'm going to be done in a minute. Any last accentuating some of these details? Just bring them up just a little bit more, just so that they don't get lost later on. And so, for the most part, I'll be able to drop in a few clean edges. I'll be able to glaze them in later on in the process, and then this should all tighten up beautifully. That's actually easy work. What you think of the details would be the hard stuff, but it's actually not. It's actually pretty easy to drop that stuff in, especially in the way that I'm going to do it on top of something like this. So that's actually pretty solid. Restate this gun. Tiny little marks. Years ago, I used to work with a brush called Series 7 #1. Greatest brush for this kind of work. I mean, it's just an incredibly fine tool. using brushes that are a little clumsy for the kind of marks that I'm making in this space. I'd be rotating the painting as I work to get a clean angle on some of these. Again, just kind of leaving the painting where it is on the easel for the sake of the camera is creating some challenges. The edge of the I'm going to go around and make sure this edge is a little soft. Just a small brush. Just going to down the edge of the armor against the background. It's just going to blur it ever so slightly. And that's going to help to marry the figure so it doesn't feel like a cutout against the background. I'm going to leave the bottom of the gun sharp so it pulls in front of this stuff. It's just giving me this beautiful little blur. Soft edge.
Kevin,
Yes.
so this painting is very blue,
Yes.
and what you're painting right now has kind of these red undertones in them.
Yes.
Will you be putting in blue reflections, or will you simply just be painting this as if it's in a natural, completely separate lighting scenario?
Probably leaving it alone, leaving it with the reds up front, and not putting any of the blues in it. I will decide as I go what is best. Like, you know, like right now, it's not done. I got to get her all the way to the ground and get some of the ground in before I can really make a decision as to whether or not it needs a little bit of blue. But at the moment, my thinking is to not have any blue in her. Leave it. Leave it just these warm reds.
And was there a certain kind of emotion you were going for with blue in the back and then
No,
red?
I don't
up front?
think like that. Mm-hmm. I don't think like that. Colors aren't an emotional thing to me. That's kind of silly to me. You can make something, you know, if the image is emotional, painting it in yellow or green or purple, it doesn't matter. The image is what does the work. You know, I mean, they make an argument that like blue makes you feel secure. I don't know if this painting makes me feel secure, but it's blue. Like, it's kind of silly, right? Like, from that standpoint. There's nothing, I don't feel secure when I look at this. I don't feel safe, but banks use blue because that's what the color supposedly does for you. I don't know who made that decision, but that's supposedly what it is. And so, you know, don't get caught up in making decisions about what color your painting is based on that stuff, right? Right. I mean, anybody looking, I don't know if that was a question someone asked, but if you look at this, does this painting make you feel secure? It's blue, right? So, but anyway, we're kind of moving along nicely. I'm going to go in, I'm going to soften the edge of the gun just a little bit, but this edge is softened a tiny little bit, just a little bit. And the surface of the painting is actually nice. It's a little slippery, so it's easy to blend the edge. And when I say blend, it's really subtle. There's almost nothing there. But I'm going to go around. I'm going to do the rest of the gun. I think, so that I have a soft edge around her. And I think, I mean, next week, I don't know if I can get this arm done also, but this will be no problem. I can say that confidently now. This will be no problem. This down here, this is a lot of easy stuff. In here will probably take me about 45 minutes. It's less work than this. And this leg, probably a half hour, if that, like all of this. Maybe this another half hour. So you're looking at an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours max to knock this out. And then I just need to get this arm done. And then I can jump in here and I can knock out the mountains, because the mountains are the same colors. They're just lower down the value scale. But the mountains are the same exact colors. This is actually the ground down in here, these shades account for that. So I actually mixed everything today in case I got everything done and I had time to do the rest of this, you know, like. So, but I should be able to knock out the rest of the figure next week. And hopefully, if I have the time, I'll get the figure done. I'll drop in the shadows on the rocks up front, which is going to come from here as well. And I'll polish off the mountains. This stuff down here is not a lot of work. It's just a matter of how quickly I can move through this. And now that I've got this is how I'm going to move it forward because this looks really good. I'm happy with the way it looks. And so I'm just going to move the rest of the painting forward the way that I did this. And you see how quickly, what did we started? We started this section at what, 10:15? Or 10:03.
Yeah.
So it took like 1 hour to get all of this done. I'll have no problem knocking this out next week. And I should be able to get at least to the mountain range and scribble in the shadows. Again, on the rocks, I'm just going to scribble in the shadows. I'm not rendering them. Just a lot of scribbling. The lights are where we'll render in the rocks. But hopefully I'll be able to get the mountains completed as well. And then all that'll be left will be the hands, the head, and the lights on the rocks. And the lights on the rocks, I'm not sure. I'm going to play around with them after next week to figure out how best to do them because I'd love to be able to knock out the head, the hands, and the rocks in one sitting. I don't know if it's realistic. There's not a lot going on in her face. Her mouth is mostly hidden. Her face is only 2 values, really. So it shouldn't be so bad. There's a lot going on in her hair, which could kind of jam me up a little bit. But I'm going to see if I can stage this a little bit better to try to move this forward and get it done in 2 more weeks. That'll be the hope. And then we may turn it, if that happens, then that last week we may do a little bit longer, maybe an extra half hour to hour, so I can go in and render in a couple of extra details into this, which will be dry at that point, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, if we have no other questions, anything else before we jump?
From Ashley, is that 1 hour and 45 minutes with or without blathering?
With. It's always blathering. It never stops. So I guess that's it.
Yep,
No
that's
questions?
it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Goodbye, everyone.